Do you live or work in or near Manchester? Then I would love it if you would come and join us at our first ever Research Adjacent networking event. That's right, we're going to be in person on Thursday, the 12th of March. It's open to anybody who is research adjacent or just curious, whether you're employed, self-employed, whatever. I'll be there to facilitate and to make sure you get to meet lots of new people. You'll find a link in the show notes to get all the details and sign up. I would love to see you there. Now it's time to shine a spotlight on our Member of the Month. Each month we celebrate a talented freelancer from the research adjacent community who provides specialist services to research organisations. This month we're delighted to introduce Vicky Boskill of Inclusive Nature, who specialises in visual storytelling. If you're looking for skilled professionals to support your research, be sure to check out the Research Adjacent directory at researchadjacent.com/directory. Now let's hear more from Vicky.
Do you want to find fresh, inclusive ways to engage audiences and create real change? I'm Vicky Boskill, and I help researchers and changemakers to connect nature, science and society by telling compelling visual stories. Find me at inclusivenature.com. That's spelt INKLUSIVE nature.com.
So I sometimes call myself the granny of research impact. People were absolutely outraged at this idea of impact. There was a petition made by the union called Save Our Research, and people in the room where it was announced, people were actually shouting about it. They were so upset. Planning for impact, opportunities for reflection and learning and feedback, and being able to say something over time about what difference you made. Those are things that apply whether you're a researcher trying to make a difference, or a charity trying to make a difference, or a public sector team trying to make a difference. But I just think my magic wand would be that research impact is seen as a third pillar.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and welcome to another episode of Research Adjacent. First up, apologies for the husky voice. I have succumbed to lurgy that is doing the rounds, but fortunately I don't feel as bad as I sound. If you're listening to this episode near its release date, I have a couple of happenings to share with you. First up is a webinar called Getting Started as a Research Adjacent Freelancer, which is on Monday the 23rd of February at 4:30pm UK time. This is aimed at people who have recently become self-employed and are trying to navigate this weird and wonderful space. Trust me, you don't have to do it alone. I'll have all sorts of insights to share from my own experience and that of other freelancers who are part of the research adjacent community. Another thing that you can't do alone is networking, and our second event is an opportunity to gather in person, which is very exciting. Genuinely, I'm very excited about it. It is an after-work networking event in Manchester on Thursday, the 12th of March. I'll be facilitating to make sure that you get to meet lots of new people, and it is open to everyone, regardless of whether you are employed or self-employed and no matter what kind of organisation you work for. I will put links to sign up for both events in the show notes, and I hope that I get to meet you at one of them. So now on with today's show. This week I am talking to impact consultant Sarah Morton. Now Sarah describes herself as the granny of impact, even though she's about the same age as me, so I'm not sure how I feel about that, because she started working in and around knowledge exchange and impact before it was even really a thing. It means she is well placed to make sense of how impact has evolved over the past 20 years, from something that incited outrage and petitions when it was first announced to the more embedded approach that we have now. This deep understanding of impact led Sarah to set up her own business, initially as Matter of Focus and now as Capture Impact, to help researchers understand, plan for and track research impact. Listen on to hear Sarah's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Sarah, from another Sarah. Always love to meet another one. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really nice to be invited to have a chat with another Sarah. Um, I am Sarah Morton. I've just set up a consultancy called Capture Impact. I've been working around the impact agenda since 2001 in various roles, but in particular, my specialism has become impact assessment or trying to understand the processes of research impact. And I suppose I'm particularly interested in ways that we can plan for, do research impact work really well and get feedback so that we can improve, but also that helps us tell the story of the difference we make. And I work not just around research, I also work a little bit with charities and public sector organisations who also want to understand, improve their impact, their data for impact, their strategies around impact. And I do a little bit of mentoring as well around the impact agenda in and outside universities.
Yeah, lots to dig into there. So, you've said that you've been involved with this since 2001. Now, I was vaguely in this world in 2001, but I wasn't aware of the term impact until much
Yeah,
later. So,
yeah,
maybe tell us a bit about the story of how we've
yeah.
ended up where we are now.
Yeah, so I sometimes call myself the granny of research impact. That makes you a granny of research impact as well. And I don't know how you feel
No.
about that. So I took a job in 2001, a brand new research centre at the University of Edinburgh, but with partners at other Scottish universities. And the context was the new Scottish Parliament. And they were the first social scientists to get a grant, which had up to that point had been really mainly won by scientists who had some sort of widget that they wanted to collaborate on. So a group of researchers all working around families and relationships across the life course got together and applied for one of these grants so that they could create better links between research policy and practice. And I saw this job advertised and I thought, oh, this job has my name on it, because at that point my background was in the voluntary sector. I did sociology at university, but then I did community education, really focusing on adult education. And I've been working mainly in intermediary bodies, actually. I was the first worker for a few different intermediary bodies. But before that, I saw that job, I'd been working in a national organisation called Children in Scotland, whose job is to develop the agenda around children and families. And I've been working on a job around children and HIV, which is very topical at that point in time in Edinburgh, particularly. And I'd also been teaching at the Open University a family policy course. So seeing this job, which was about linking research with policy and practice around families and relationships, I was like, oh, this is a thing I know quite a lot about. And it was a kind of weird mixture, really, because I don't know, it was just a bit of serendipity. But I remember going to the interview. It was a massive interview panel. I think it was 8 people, and thinking, oh, I know all this stuff that they don't know, because I knew all the organisations in the third sector in Scotland. I knew all the local authorities. Like, I knew the sector outside the university that was relevant to this new research centre, and they really didn't. It's one of the most knowledgeable times, one of the times I felt more knowledgeable than any other point in my life, because I was like, oh yeah, I have stuff they really need to know here. So that was how it started off, and I was called a research liaison officer. So we didn't have, like you said, we didn't have the language of impact, didn't really have the language of knowledge exchange.
Yeah.
There was a bit of knowledge transfer going on, but that was very much based on the idea that universities have a thing that they're going to share with the external world. And there was a bit of science communication going on, but there was very much like training students to go into schools. It wasn't really, and the science festival, of course. It felt like it was a very kind of new area of work at that point in time. But yeah, also a great opportunity. New Scottish Parliament, brand new civil servants, brand new ministers, parliamentarians, all going, oh, what are we going to do now?
Yeah, really interesting point in time to come into it. And then, so you say at that point in time, we didn't use the language, like impact wasn't something that's used, knowledge exchange wasn't even something that was used. But do you think that work that you did there then laid the foundations, some of the foundations for what we now understand as knowledge exchange and impact?
I think in some ways, yes. So I started that job in 2001 and I stayed there till 2017 in various roles in the university, not the same job. But in 2008, I did what I call my midlife PhD, because I suppose I was working there. So it ended up we had a little team of people working at that research centre with all of these researchers, not just at the University of Edinburgh, elsewhere. So an events person, a designer who did a newsletter. It started off with just me. I was like laying out a kind of policy briefing using a desktop publishing tool, so it was very primitive. And then we also had some knowledge exchange staff that came on particular projects. So we ended up being a little team. And I suppose by the time I got to 2008, I'd been there for quite a while, and I was like, I'd become a director of the research centre, but I was like, okay, it's quite good fun doing all this stuff and getting researchers to go and talk to government, or I don't know, we did quite a lot of work with like people with lived experience and representing their views. And we had I was going to say a webinar series, but no, a seminar series. People used to come to the door
in real life,
yeah, where social workers would come and researchers would come and people from the government or public agencies would all come and hear about new research and talk about new research. So it was very vibrant, and it did really well, but we were quite far ahead of the impact agenda as we would now think about it. So in 2008 I was like, this is good, but like I can't quite see what's going to happen next. And I decided to do a PhD, partly to consolidate my learning, but also because I realized career-wise there is a block within the university system around progression if you've not got a PhD. And I was on an administrative contract until right near the end before I left. It was quite random whether knowledge exchange people were on administrative or academic tracks. It just really varied. And so I decided, okay, let's do a PhD. And then I was doing the PhD in what is research impact and how can it be assessed. So 2008 to 2012. And so I think Ref Impact got announced halfway through 2010.
I was going to say, in my head, Impact became a thing around about 2010. I couldn't put an absolute date on it, but it felt like it was around then. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this is interesting. I went to a conference in London where it was announced by, I'm trying to think who it would have been. Anyway, it was announced by one of the research bodies, and Research England, I think, probably, or maybe Research UK. Anyway, and people were absolutely outraged at this idea of impact. There was a petition made by the union called Save Our Research.
Oh, goodness.
And people in the room where it was announced, people were actually shouting about it. They were so upset. And so it was quite weird for me, because I was used to working with researchers who thought impact was important in my role.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there going, oh, okay, so people really worried about this. But because I wasn't at all worried, I thought, we have the ref. The ref is a bit of it's so heavy on publications, excuse the agenda towards that. To me, it was more like a balancing measure than anything else.
Yeah.
And as we know, everyone accepts it now. But at the time, it was pretty controversial. So by the time then I finished writing my PhD in 2012, of course, Ref 2014 was pretty much coming down the line quite fast. And I got quite involved in helping people with impact case studies at the University of Edinburgh, mainly, a little bit elsewhere. But yeah, so it all trundled into this whole new world then.
Yeah. So what were some of the big objections that people had to impact in the beginning?
Yeah, so some of the things you still hear a little bit now, like, how on earth can I have impact? My job is to research. It's not up to impact is what other people do. So that kind of idea that there should be a real separation between research thinking and action and the government or actors in the social world. And then a bit of so that's the kind of existential objection. And if you're going to introduce a measure and you're going to force people to have impact, you're going to ruin research, because then the only thing people will ever pursue is what they think the government wants. It was very kind of black and white thinking about it. And I think that there always have been lots of really impactful researchers, haven't there, who work with policy, influence practice, whatever else they've done, influence public debate, all of these things. And it was a bit of an overreaction. And also at that point, they didn't know impact case studies is not every single member of staff. All of those nuances that came in later, I think, made people a little happier. But people were generally not that happy all the way up to 2014. It was only after the fact, then they were like, oh, look, we've had all this impact. We can put it on our website. Doesn't it make us look good?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The reason I ask, because I think it's really interesting parallels with the conversation that's been happening literally in the last week or two around a certain amount of outrage, I think there definitely is in some parts about the inclusion of culture or whatever strategy, whatever they've
Yeah.
decided to call it, metrics in the ref.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the parallels and then also to see, as you say, once the dust settled and it's clear what's expected or what's
Mhm.
not expected, how people then start to perceive that it can be a good thing.
Yeah.
But
People don't like change, do they? I was thinking about this the other day with the smoking ban. Right up until the day the smoking ban came in, people were like, oh, it's going to ruin pubs forever and there's going to be all this devastation. Almost the next day, no one really cares. It was quite stark. So people don't like change, do they? And yeah. And in the end, the ref is an accountability exercise. And I feel like it does drive the agenda more than it should. And apparently, academics are more susceptible to these government accountability exercises than other professions. Other professions are a bit like, oh, yeah, that's the government thing. Let's just game it as much as we can and get on with our real job. Whereas I think academics, maybe they're people who are used to doing well in tests. So they see it as a test. They're like, oh, we must do our best in the test.
it's interesting. I've often had that thought about, yeah, the whole culture of academia and everything like that. Is this is a group of people who have always come top of the class for
Yes.
everything
Yeah.
because otherwise they wouldn't be where they are. And yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes the vulnerabilities that come with having to learn something new or be, no, I don't mean to be bad at it because everybody's bad at something when they first do it,
Yeah.
but to have to learn something
Have to know
new.
something. Or
Yeah.
change their kind of formula, if you like, because they've learned a
Yes.
formula that has made them succeed in a very particular way. And basically, all of these things are saying actually that formula isn't completely fair, and we want to look at it in a little bit more of a rounded way. And then they're like, oh, but no, because we're really good at this formula. So it's yeah, it's not
Interesting.
surprising.
Interesting. Oh, but yeah, so Shifty, you did say that of the work that you don't just look at impact in
Mm,
academia, but also you've worked with like charities and
yeah.
other types of
Mm.
organizations. So how do they approach thinking about, do they use the same terminology or do they think about things differently?
The whole terminology thing is really fascinating because whether you talk about impact or outcomes, it depends a lot on, it's just a sector thing we found
Mhm.
because for the last 7 or 8 years I was working with Ailsa, my colleague Ailsa Cook at Matter of Focus, and we were working right across international development universities, public sector organizations, charities, and the only thing we could ever find was it was just a sector preference. If you're in health and
Mhm.
social care, you probably talk about outcomes. If you're in international development, you might talk about outcomes and impact. If you're in the public sector, you might talk about impact. A lot of charities want to talk about impact. I think, I'm sorry, I'm not very well informed about this, but there's a new thing coming to the charity regulations in England where people have to talk about impact. So it's very slippery. It's not very well defined. And it's very interesting when you spend your time going between all these organizations because the challenges are all the same. Like people are like, oh, I've got to track impact, but I don't really know what it is. So you can't track
Yeah.
something until you've really clearly defined it. So a lot of the work that I've done over the years and still do with people is helping them think, what actually is it? And how are we going to approach it as an organization? And how can we support it? And I think getting people to track impact just raises all these questions about strategy and the place in the institution and what support they can expect and all of those kind of questions. And that's the same whatever sector you're in.
Yeah. You find that whilst the terminology and things like that might change, you use the same methods and approaches and techniques
Yeah.
and things with
Well,
different.
yeah. We've developed a very particular, quite practical approach because I suppose when I came to this thinking, trying to think about it in a little bit more of a kind of strategic and practical way through my PhD, I was someone whose job was director of knowledge exchange. Like my job was not impact assessor. And so I was thinking about it very much as, okay, well, I really want to know that when I do these things, they're the right things to do and they are making a difference and they're having an impact. Because in the end, the only reason I'm involved in any of this stuff is because I think research should have an impact. We shouldn't spend lots and lots of public money on stuff that just is only for academic debate and never really benefits wider people. So, that's what I care about. So then I'd be like, okay, how can we know as a team of knowledge exchange people whether we're doing the right things, what the most effective things are, where should we put our resources? So I very much came to it like that. And it's not like you're going to pay someone to come and be an impact evaluator for you. You need to have something that you can fit in with what you do in your job, which is what's happened to researchers more generally in the research impact agenda. So, I wanted to develop a method that was really pragmatic, that helped planning for impact, that provided opportunities for learning and reflection, and that could be used for tracking impact. So the kind of, it's based on contribution analysis, the way that I do that, but that is equally relevant, like planning for impact, opportunities for reflection and learning and feedback, and being able to say something over time about what difference you made. Those are things that apply whether you're a researcher trying to make a difference, or a charity trying to make a difference, or a public sector team trying to make a difference. The principles all apply and the method applies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that the same concepts apply across different situations. I
Mm.
guess another thing that must apply across lots of different situations is that, as you say, you can plan for impact and you can take steps and you can capture things and reflect on it and so on, but it doesn't always go the way that you
Yeah.
think it's going to be. And so managing those expectations around impact
Mm.
must be challenging as well.
Yeah, one of the things we developed a Matter of Focus was getting people to tell success stories as a way of really thinking about how does this happen when it's working well. So we have a little framework that we get people to set out a theory of change with. So this is what I developed off the back of my PhD. So getting people to say, actually, how does change really happen here? When it's working really well, what does it look like? Because no one's hosting a policymaker breakfast because they just invented it today. They're doing it because they've seen someone else do it, or they've heard it's the right thing to do, or someone wants them to do it, or there's always a reason. So everyone has a reason for doing the things they do. And it's really getting all of that out in the open in a very explicit
Mm.
way that gives you a way of then testing it and saying, oh, is it working well? Or is it what we thought? For example, when I was at the Centre for Research on Families and Relationships, we had a long-term collaboration with Childline Scotland, and we did some research with them, and it was very much partnership research. And someone from their team was on our research team, their policy officer, and we were sharing results of one particular bit of research we did, and we decided that directors of social work and education were really important to hear these results in the local authorities. So like, how can we get them? So we designed this kind of prestigious event to try and get these heads of social work and education, and actually we got quite a lot of them. Good. But then we went, okay, how many did we get? How many did we not get? What should we do about the ones we didn't get? You're not just going, okay, we're going to do this and then we've done it and walk away. You're actually trying to build in a kind of way of thinking a bit more deeply about what went well, what didn't go well. Did we get the sort of response we want? Do we need to do something else? Or have we missed people or whatever? So it's that really deliberate plotting out what you think, what you hope is going to happen, but then as it unfolds, testing it and saying, oh, has it happened? What went well, what didn't go well, and then how can you regroup if it didn't go well? And actually I've had a couple of other occasions that there was one time we presented some research that was received in a very hostile way. I won't go into
Mm.
the details, but I mean, I can if you want, but I think it's too long a story. And so we did not get the reaction we'd hoped at all. And so we were like, okay, right, now what are we going to do? And we actually had to go back to the drawing board and partner with some of these organizations who'd been really hostile and work out with them, how can we change this? And what can we do together to make these messages more palatable? Because they still were really important messages, but people didn't or weren't ready to hear them. So we'd made a load of assumptions and people were going to go, oh yeah, great, we should really change this. And actually they didn't. They felt really criticized and they completely put their hackles up. So I think, yeah, just trying to be more reflective and really build in a sense of why are we doing this and what do we hope is going to happen?
Mm.
And then is that what happens? Is that what
Yeah.
we can see? And if you haven't got any feedback, your own observations are one form of feedback, but if you're not getting feedback from people, things can just die and
Yeah.
then they're gone and
Yeah.
then you've not had an impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It sounds very much though what you're talking about reminds me of when I used to do research though. And I
yeah,
do experiments and you
yeah,
try something
yeah,
and if it works and then see if you get the result you expected. And if you
yeah.
don't, then you try something else and you keep working at it.
And maybe the thing is that people are used to, if they're researchers, there being a lot of scaffolding around that process. And when it comes to knowledge mobilization, there's no scaffolding, and people are just inventing it over and over again, even though we know quite a lot now about what's effective and what's not effective. And there has been quite a lot of research done into how does it happen? How does impact happen and what goes on? But people feel they're in this kind of free for all where they've just got to make stuff up and just do things. And actually, the other thing that in the work I do is getting people just to take a step back from that and go, okay, what would be the most effective strategy if I want to educate A&E nurses about a new whatever? Then, so rather than just launching off and doing the things they've always done, just really taking a step back and trying to strategize around what are the best methods for knowledge mobilization, really.
Just that pause can make such a difference, can't it? Pausing, thinking, really thinking about why. That comes up for me so often when I'm talking about just less big picture things, just communications and events and things. It's like, why are we doing this? What do you want to get out of it? And then designing things around that rather than just either doing something because it seems like a good idea or doing it because that's how it's always been done. So you've hinted at some of your journey. I wonder if we can maybe just piece together some of those bits and pieces. So you spent a long time at this, I'm going to probably say it wrong, but Centre for Children and Families, and
so
that research centre. And then
Centre for Research on Families and Relationships. And then I got a little bit more involved in other parts of the bigger parts of the university, the more department level or institute level. And the thing is, up to then, as I was saying, I worked in the voluntary sector when I was young. I had a lot of jobs where I was the first one. So I was the first person to do the work on HIV and AIDS. It was trying to make links between adult HIV organisations and children's organisations, non-specialist children organisations. And then I was the first worker for the Association of Chief Officers of Scottish Voluntary Organisations, which just changed its name. And I was the first worker for another intermediary. So I'd been in this space where I had quite a lot of room for action. Then when I started at the Centre for Research on Families and Relationships, no one talked about impact. No one else was doing my job. I completely got to do what I wanted and make it up. But then as I progressed, and we were chatting in our previous call about, it's actually really hard to progress in knowledge exchange, knowledge mobilization, whatever you want to call it, within an institution. I know this is still the case now. So I did get some promotions, but every promotion we had to argue for, because if you're on an administrative track, it's all about how many people you manage. And if you're on an academic track, it's all about your publications and grants. And of course, I was somewhere in between those two things, but also it wasn't really the people I directly managed. It was more about all of the external contacts and partnerships and all of those kind of things. So every time we would fail on the tick box exercise, but when we went to appeal and explain, they'd be, oh yeah, fine, good. So it was quite a battle to really, it definitely felt like it was quite hard to fit. And especially when the union had a petition, Save Our Research, when they announced the impact agenda, it just made all people who had roles like mine think, is this union even for us? Because that's what our jobs were. So I got to a point where then I was director for knowledge exchange for kind of some bigger units and stuff, but all I could see ahead of me was this massive, great bureaucracy. And I just thought, it doesn't suit my skill set and my orientation towards work to be just in a big bureaucracy playing the politics and everything being a little bit of a battle, and especially in an area that wasn't well trodden, because it wasn't like there was an automatic way that you could progress. It was going to have to be at every step of the way trying to redefine this space. And so at that point I decided a few things happened, and then I'd finished my PhD and I'd invented this method of assessing impact based on contribution analysis, and I started working with Ailsa Cook, who I then went into business with, because we were like, okay, this is a really interesting way of getting people to think about outcomes and impact in a more robust way, so they can really understand the difference that they make in whatever setting they are. And after we talked for about a year actually to define what we wanted to do, and then we set up Matter of Focus, and we built a software tool, a Matter of Focus, that helped people like hold these theories of change and be able to pull data and evidence in against them. So we became two middle-aged women tech entrepreneurs.
Love it. Fantastic.
And again, we did not fit at all. We actually were in a tech hub to start. We were in a tech hub for a while. We were so not the normal mold, although it's shown that people who are older and more successful in business, people who go into business with other people, like between 2 and 5 directors, is much more successful than one. So the whole solo entrepreneur model that's held up is actually a bit of a fallacy. There was quite a lot of advantages to the way we were doing things. And so did that until quite recently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, this business of being on an administrative contract and then not fitting into the spaces and then trying to evidence the work that you were doing that was more applicable to the academic contracts and not being able to get promotion. I think so many people listening to this will really resonate with that, and will also resonate with the fact that when they look at what might be ahead in their careers, it becomes almost, the more senior you get in a professional role in somewhere like a university, the more administrative it becomes and the less you do the work. So that's certainly something that I've experienced and other people that I've spoken to on the podcast have experienced as well. But to take the pivot from that to go and start a business is quite a big move. But as you say, you've now changed again and you're doing something on your own now.
So we decided just recently to close Matter of Focus just because the current environment is, as everyone knows, is really tough. It just felt there wasn't enough room for maneuver anymore. And so we decided to close the company. We sold the software onto another company and I've just set up on my own, but doing similar kind of work. So working with organizations around how can they be more impactful, whether that's having better strategies for impact, whether that's assessing impact more, whether that's building capability and skills within an organization to use data and evidence better so that they can understand impact, and a little bit of mentoring people, because there's quite a lot of people who are the only impact person in a team, an organization, or whatever that is, and it can be quite lonely. And I think, and actually going back to your previous point, I think a lot of us thrive in these knowledge exchange roles because we're really good with people, quite innovative, and we don't really mind not being quite completely absorbed by one thing or another. You're like a little bit on the periphery and really good at relationship building and all of that. But all of those skills really are not what you need if you're going to be in a more bureaucratic position where it's much more about, fitting in and playing the politics. So I think there is a big mismatch there. And, most people in knowledge mobilization and research impact roles, they have to be quite innovative and positive and encourage people to try things and take people to the lake, whether or not they want to drink and all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's, in terms of people's skill set, it's not very well suited to then these big bureaucracies. Yeah.
No, and it's a skill set as well that is, as you say, so incredibly valuable. Even just when you talked about the very first job interview that you went for, where you realized that you had all these networks, all this experience, which was exactly what they didn't have. So having those connections, having those networks, having those communities, that ability to pull together lots of different threads is so fundamental to how these roles work and are successful, but also often quite invisible work. There's been a couple of episodes recently on the podcast where we've talked about hidden roles and hidden labor in research. And yes, with the ref, and they're saying anybody can submit outputs or be like named or that sort of thing, they're still talking about outputs, and you can't you can't quantify the impact of these kind of relational roles.
Yeah, and I once did a bit of impact assessment work for UNICEF, partly because for UNICEF research arm, because there were these researchers who they're working around ending violence against children, and they were in Peru, and they were spending a lot of time building relationships between the government statisticians, the different cross-departmental government bodies that needed to be involved in changing anything around violence against children, the local academics and the local organizations. And they were under a lot of pressure from their organization about where are your outputs. And what they were doing was doing all this relationship building. And eventually, when they did produce outputs, they produced them collaboratively with these government statisticians, and they had a massive impact. They were trying to fend off this pressure to deliver publications really before they were ready. And so, yeah, they got me in to save their bacon in a way, because they had to show that what they were doing was impactful
Yeah.
because it was completely invisible in the
Yeah.
system. That's what they were up to. And I think that's often the case, isn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think it is still lots of people that I've talked to recently talking about how this emotional labor, the relational work
Mm.
that goes into a lot of these projects and programs is still missing
Mm.
in the conversations, even though things are improving, but there's still these gaps. So, as we've covered a huge amount of ground there, and I'll be interested now to know your answer to my magic wand question, which is if you had a magic wand, what would you change about this knowledge exchange and impact world that you work in?
Oh, and I still think that knowledge exchange impact in universities, particularly, is just still such a little baby compared with these monolithic research and administrative kind of tracks within institutions. Now, both of those, so the way we do research and the way we administer universities, is hundreds of years old. It's been built on hundreds of years of evolution and design, and there's quite a lot of things wrong with both of them, but there's quite a lot of things that work really well about both of them. And then along comes a little baby knowledge exchange going, oh, look at me, I need a bit of space. And honestly, the space is still so tiny with such little resource and such little strategy. So I think what tends to happen is universities have these big grand statements about how they're going to be the most impactful in the Western world, or whatever it is. That most universities now have something like that, but it doesn't knit down into structures, processes, and resource flows. It just sits there and it's batted between admin and research. So I'm sure a lot of research impact officers experience this every day, because maybe they're responsible to some sort of administrative boss in somewhere in that side of things, but all the day, every day, they're working with people on the research side of things, and then the resources that are supposed to pay for anything they hope people might do, or they might be trying to support people to do, are invisible, or maybe they're supposed to be in the research grant but they're not, or they're supposed to be. And then there's some really hopeful shoots of things like impact prizes and a bit more recognition of people. But I just think my magic wand would be that research impact is seen as a third pillar, because in the end, and also the universities see it as something that matters in its own sake, not just because the ref says it should, but because they actually care about having an impact, and that it's as structured with strategy, people, very clearly defined roles and resources as the other two. But I think, how many do we need to, another 400 years for that?
Yeah, I think in some universities that might be the case. I think some are getting there. I've definitely seen, it's interesting you talked about three pillars model. I can't remember who it was, but I've definitely seen something like that recently where it had, research, teaching, and impact as the pillars the
And,
university was built
mm,
on.
and one of the reasons I left was because after Ref 2014, I was like, okay, good. We've been through the pain of that. People have got the idea of it. And in that ref, I don't know if you remember, some people remember, you had impact case studies, but you also had a sort of impact statement for each
Mhm.
unit of assessment. So you'd say something about, how do we support impact in this unit? We have a seminar series, whatever. And I thought, okay, that's happened. Now universities can think about, how do we support impact? But no, they went straight into, where are our next impact case studies? And I just
Yeah.
thought, okay, they only care about the exercise. They don't actually care about thinking, where are our structures for impact? How can we actually support it and make sure it happens? And I just feel like it's really tough on researchers saying, oh yeah, just have some impact. You don't have the skills, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the expertise. We might give you half a day of someone, maybe 2 hours, to come and talk to you about a pathway to impact, or help you write a bit of a grant, or maybe if you're really lucky, organize an event, although not that often, you normally have to pay for that. So there's such little resource and help, and people are just supposed to do it as though it was something they've always done. I thought, I can't work for an institution that actually cares this little about
Mhm.
impact, because I
Mhm.
really care about it. And I think that's true of a lot of us, isn't it, in these roles? Like, we actually really care about impact actually happening and the good it can do. And when it works well, we've all seen amazing things can happen.
Yeah.
But the institution isn't really there to support that and learn and think what amazing things can happen. It's much more interested in looking good a lot of the time, or ticking the boxes. I'm sorry to sound cynical, but yeah, I just, for me, this is not the right fit. I need to do something that's a little bit more focused on what actually matters. And I was really pleased that during lockdown, when Ailsa and I managed to write a book which kind of consolidated some of our method and put it out there. And it's called How Do You Know You're Making a Difference? Because in the end, that's what I care about. We're trying to make a difference here. The whole idea of assessing the impact isn't so that you can tick a box, it's so that you can show you've made a difference. And
it's absolutely, it's almost flipping the incentives, isn't it? And I appreciate that ref, and at least it's helping to move things in that direction, but still so many organizations are doing it because they have to, not because it's the right thing to do, aren't they? But it sounds like that book is a fantastic resource for anybody who is interested in finding out about your work. Can you just remind us again what it was called?
It's called How Do You Know You're Making a Difference? It's at Policy Press. If you're on their mailing list, I think you get a discount. And we can share in the resources. I wrote a paper off the back of my PhD about assessing research impact, which is a really highly cited paper. So if people want a free version, that's it.
Fantastic. We'll get that, track it down, get it into the show notes. Yeah, brilliant. And otherwise, whereabouts can people find out about you and the work that you do?
Yes, so I'm on LinkedIn, so really happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. And also I've just set up this consultancy called Capture Impact. So you'll find me on captureimpact.co.uk.
Excellent. I'll get those links as well, put them in the show notes.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for coming along, sharing your story, sharing your insights on impact. I'm sure it'll be really helpful.
Thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.